Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be looking at Angela Merkel,
Oh, yeah.
the former Chancellor of Germany.
Very cool.
She's been called one of the most powerful women in the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're really going to try to understand her journey through politics.
Yeah, her impact.
Her impact. And we're going straight to the source for this one. We've got
Straight to the source.
Merkel's Wikipedia entry
Okay, cool.
and a Forbes profile that really highlights some of the key moments in her career.
Excellent. It's so fascinating to me how Merkel's story really is the story of modern Germany.
Yeah.
It's intertwined with all of these major global events, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Eurozone crisis, even the rise of social media. It's really something.
It is. It's like she had a front row seat to history.
Yeah.
Yeah. And on top of all that, we've got like shaking spells, football fandom, even a cameo in the Dictator movie.
What?
I know all this alongside quantum chemistry and international diplomacy. So
That's a lot.
it's a lot. I'm already hooked.
Well, yeah, I think those little details tell you a lot about a person, their character, their values, their way of thinking.
For sure.
Yeah.
So let's start at the beginning.
Right.
Merkel was born in Hamburg, but her family moved to East Germany when she was just a girl.
Okay.
So she grew up in a totally different world behind the Iron Curtain during the Cold War.
Yeah, that's crucial. That context.
Yeah.
Imagine growing up in a society where, freedom of movement, freedom of speech,
Right.
freedom of thought, even were restricted.
Yeah.
That shaped her worldview in a way that's hard for us to even understand.
Totally. And then she goes on to earn a doctorate in quantum chemistry.
Wow.
Talk about brain power.
Yeah.
I mean, did you know she worked as a research scientist for years before she got into politics?
I did know that, yeah, and I think that scientific background is really key to understanding how she approached problems later on.
Okay.
Very analytical, data-driven, always looking for practical solutions.
Yeah.
Not a fiery orator or anything. Someone who really, assesses the facts carefully before making a decision.
So then 1989, the Berlin Wall comes down.
Huge.
Everything changes. Germany's reunified. And just a month after that, Merkel jumps into politics.
Wow.
It's like she was waiting for the right moment.
It's like she was swept up in the tide of history.
Yeah.
Think about it. The country that she knew was gone.
Right.
There was a new chapter beginning.
Yeah.
And she wanted to be a part of shaping that new Germany.
So she joins this party called Democratic Awakening.
Okay.
And she climbs the ranks quickly.
Yeah.
From deputy spokesperson to Minister for Women and Youth under Helmut Kohl, and then Minister for the Environment.
It's a quick rise.
Yeah.
And even in that early role, you see these signs of the pragmatism that would become like her trademark.
Okay.
Like she advocated for a slower phase out of nuclear power than the previous administration had wanted.
Interesting.
She wasn't ideologically opposed to it. She was focused on what she saw as a realistic and responsible transition for Germany's energy sector.
Okay, fast forward to 2005. Merkel becomes the first female chancellor of Germany, leading a grand coalition government.
A grand coalition.
Yeah, I have to admit, when I first read that, I was like, what's a grand coalition? It sounds like a party.
Right. It's a really important concept in German politics.
Okay.
Basically, it means that the two biggest rival parties, the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats,
Right.
they put aside their differences and team up to form a government.
Wow.
It's a sign of compromise, putting the country's needs above, party interests.
And that's something that Merkel would become known for, right?
Yeah.
Like building bridges, finding common ground.
Absolutely.
It's like that saying, you can disagree without being disagreeable.
Exactly. And that ability to find consensus was crucial, especially when she faced, kind of her first major test on the world stage, the 2003 invasion of Iraq.
Yeah.
Remember, she openly supported the invasion, even though there was strong public opposition in Germany.
That was a controversial move, to say the least.
It was.
It's like she was sending a signal that Germany was ready to take a more assertive role in international affairs.
Yeah.
Even if it meant going against popular opinion.
It showed a willingness to align with key allies.
Yeah.
Even on issues where there was a deep disagreement within her own country.
Yeah.
And it kind of set the stage for her later role as a mediator, this voice of reason in a world that was increasingly divided.
Then there's the issue of Turkey's potential membership in the European Union.
Right.
Merkel wasn't exactly thrilled about that idea, was she?
She wasn't a huge fan, no.
She preferred what they called a privileged partnership.
Yeah.
He was like, we're friends, but not that kind of friends.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay.
It's that cautious, pragmatic approach. again, you know.
Yeah.
She recognized Turkey's importance as a strategic partner,
Uh-huh.
but she was wary of fully integrating a country with such a different cultural and political landscape.
Right.
It was a balancing act.
Yeah.
And she opted for a middle ground that wouldn't rock the boat too much.
So we've got this picture of Merkel as a scientist turned politician, someone who's methodical, data-driven, always looking for compromise.
Right.
But then everything changes with the 2008 financial crisis.
Yeah, things get real.
Things get real.
Yeah, the global financial crisis of '08, it sent shockwaves like all throughout the world, you know.
Yeah.
And the Eurozone, with all those interconnected economies, was hit really hard.
Oh, yeah.
It was a tough time. And suddenly Merkel's thrust into this role of like crisis manager.
Right.
Not just for Germany,
Yeah.
but for the entire like European project.
I can't imagine the pressure she must have been under.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's one thing to manage a country, but
Right.
trying to keep an entire currency union from collapsing, that's...
Yeah, the stakes were incredibly high.
Yeah.
I mean, if the euro failed, it could have triggered a global financial meltdown,
Oh, wow.
potentially even political instability across Europe.
So what does she do?
Well, one of the first big challenges was this fear of bank runs,
Okay.
people panicking and withdrawing all their savings,
Yeah. Right.
which could have just crippled the whole financial system.
Makes sense.
Initially, Merkel resisted this idea of guaranteeing private savings accounts.
Okay, why?
Well, she argued that it would create a moral hazard,
Oh, okay.
encouraging risky behavior because people would know they were protected no matter what.
I see, but then they reverse course, right?
They did, yeah.
Like, what changed?
Well, the situation was just like deteriorating so rapidly.
Yeah.
And the German government ultimately decided that, the risk of a complete financial collapse, it was just too great.
Yeah.
So they announced that all private savings accounts would be guaranteed by the government,
Wow.
which helped to like calm the markets and prevent this widespread panic.
That must have been such a hard decision.
It was, yeah. And it highlights that immense responsibility that Merkel was carrying. Like, these weren't just abstract economic concepts.
Right.
These were decisions that directly impacted like millions of people's lives.
Yeah, for sure. Then there's a whole Greek debt crisis. Oh, yeah. Which I remember hearing about in the news, but honestly didn't fully understand.
Sure. Yeah.
Can you give us the SparkNotes version?
Basically, Greece had accumulated all this debt.
Oh.
Way more than it could afford to repay.
Ah.
And this triggered this like crisis of confidence in the whole Eurozone.
Okay.
With fears that Greece might just default on its debt and be forced to leave the single currency.
Right. And Germany was the biggest creditor, right?
They were.
So Merkel's in the position of like deciding whether to bail out Greece or let it sink.
It was a tough spot to be in, for sure, and a very politically charged issue.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of Germans felt like they shouldn't have to pay for Greece's mistakes,
Right.
while others argued that it was in Germany's best interest to keep the Eurozone intact,
Mm-hmm.
even if it meant, providing financial assistance.
Yeah. So what did Merkel do?
Well, she ultimately spearheaded a series of bailout packages for Greece,
Okay.
but they came with some pretty strict conditions.
Okay. What kind of conditions?
These were the infamous austerity measures.
Oh, yeah.
Cuts to government spending, pension reforms, tax increases.
Oh, wow.
All designed to reduce Greece's debt and restore its economic stability.
It sounds like a tough pill to swallow.
It was, and the impact on the Greek people was really severe. Unemployment soared, poverty increased.
Oh, wow.
And there was a lot of anger, resentment towards Germany and Merkel personally.
Yeah, so maybe she prevented a financial collapse, but at a really high cost.
Right. It's a reminder that even when leaders make decisions with the best intentions,
Yeah.
there can be these unintended consequences.
For sure. Okay, let's move on to something a little less gloomy.
Okay, sure.
Domestic policies.
Oh.
I was surprised to learn that under Merkel Germany abolished conscription
Oh, wow.
and switched to an all-volunteer military.
Yeah, that's a pretty big shift.
It is. Why'd they do that?
At the time, it was seen as the sign of peace and stability in Europe.
Okay.
The Cold War was over.
Right.
The threat of like a major conflict seemed really remote.
Right.
And a lot of people believed that a smaller, more professionalized military
Right.
was enough for Germany's needs.
But then, of course, the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine happened.
Yeah, that changed everything.
And now that decision to downsize the military is being questioned.
It is.
Yeah.
What are people saying?
Well, I mean, the invasion of Ukraine just shattered this idea of lasting peace in Europe.
Right.
And suddenly Germany's faced with this major security threat.
Yeah.
And some argue that its downsized military isn't equipped to respond.
That's scary.
It is, yeah. It shows how decisions that make sense at one time can be totally upended
Yeah.
by these unforeseen events.
And it shows how important it is to constantly reassess and adapt to changing circumstances.
Absolutely, something Merkel was known for doing throughout her career.
Right. Speaking of changing circumstances, let's talk about healthcare.
Okay.
Seems like healthcare reform was a recurring theme
It was, yeah.
during Merkel's time.
Like a lot of developed countries, Germany's facing these challenges,
Yeah.
Providing affordable, high-quality healthcare for an aging population.
Yeah.
So Merkel implemented a number of reforms,
Okay.
but they often sparked debate and criticism.
You mean an example?
Well, one example is this reform that introduced a fixed co-payment for doctor visits.
Oh, okay.
The idea was to contain costs and make patients more aware of, healthcare expenses.
Okay.
The thinking was if people have to pay a little fee each time they see a doctor,
Yeah.
they might be less likely to seek unnecessary medical attention.
I get that, but I can also see how that would raise concerns about access,
You're right.
especially for people who are struggling financially.
Exactly. And that was one of the criticisms leveled at that particular reform.
Yeah.
Opponents argued that it created a barrier to healthcare for those who could least afford it.
It seems like there's no easy fix when it comes to healthcare.
No, it's always a balancing act,
Yeah.
between access cost and quality.
Okay, so we've covered financial crises,
Mm.
military reforms, healthcare headaches.
Oh.
Now let's talk about an issue that really defined Merkel's later years in office
Okay.
and continues to shape European politics today, the migrant crisis of the 2010s.
This was a turning point, not just for Merkel, but for Germany's identity as a nation.
Yeah.
It really tested the country's values.
Yeah.
Its capacity for compassion, its ability to integrate newcomers.
I remember those images in the news, thousands of refugees
Yeah.
fleeing conflict in Syria and other places,
Right.
arriving in Europe seeking safety and a better life.
Yeah.
And Merkel's response was, well, remarkable.
It was, remember that now famous phrase,
Yeah.
"Wir schaffen das, we can do it"?
Yeah.
I mean, those 3 words captured the essence of her approach.
Uh-huh.
A belief in Germany's ability to rise to the challenge.
Right.
A commitment to welcoming those in need.
Yeah.
And a rejection of the fear and xenophobia that was spreading across Europe.
She opened Germany's borders to hundreds of thousands of refugees.
She did?
And that was a decision that was both praised and condemned.
It was a deeply polarizing issue, for sure.
Yeah.
Her supporters saw it as this act of humanitarian leadership, a reaffirmation of Germany's commitment to human rights.
Right.
But there was a backlash, too.
Of course.
Critics argued that she was being naive,
Okay.
that she was overwhelming Germany's resources and putting the country's security at risk.
So no matter what she did, she was going to face criticism.
Kind of a no-win situation, yeah.
Yeah. But it's important to remember the context.
Right.
This was a huge humanitarian crisis.
Absolutely.
And Merkel made a moral choice,
I think so, too.
a choice that reflected her values.
Yeah, her belief in compassion and empathy.
It's fascinating how a single event can reveal so much about a leader.
It is.
And it's also a reminder that leadership isn't about popularity contests.
No, it's not.
It's about making tough decisions.
Right.
Even when they're unpopular.
And those decisions often have long-lasting consequences, as we've seen.
Yeah.
It fueled the rise of right-wing populism in Germany and across Europe. And it continues to shape debates about immigration, integration, national identity.
So from saving the euro to welcoming refugees, Merkel faced some pretty daunting challenges.
She did.
And we haven't even gotten to climate change, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, or those mysterious shaking spells.
You're right. There's a lot more to unpack here.
What stands out to you so far about Merkel's leadership?
Well, I'm struck by her resilience.
Yeah.
Her ability to navigate these incredibly complex issues and her willingness to make tough decisions even when they were controversial.
I'm also curious to see how all these experiences shaped her later years in office and ultimately her legacy.
Well, that's exactly where we're headed next, so stay tuned as we dive deeper into the world of Angela Merkel.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're wrapping up our look at Angela Merkel.
Yeah.
And I have to say she's even more fascinating than I initially thought.
She really is. What's so remarkable is how she managed to stay in power for so long, 16 years as chancellor. It's a real testament to her political skill, but also to the trust she built with the German people.
Trust is a tricky thing in politics, though, especially these days.
Yeah.
What was it about Merkel that resonated with voters?
Part of it was her personality. She wasn't flashy or charismatic,
Right.
but she had this aura of competence and stability.
Okay.
The sources describe her as pragmatic, down-to-earth, even a bit awkward at times.
Yeah.
Almost like, a relatable aunt who happened to be running the country.
I love that image.
Okay.
Not your typical world leader.
Right.
But speaking of image, I have to ask about those shaking spells
Oh, yeah.
that she had in public. I remember seeing those news clips and thinking something was seriously wrong.
Yeah, it was definitely alarming to witness.
Yeah.
And it sparked a lot of speculation about her health.
Of course.
But what struck me was how Merkel handled it.
Oh.
With stoicism and even a little bit of humor.
Oh.
She didn't try to hide it,
Right.
She just acknowledged it and kept going.
Like, yeah, this is happening, but I'm still in control.
Exactly. Talk about resilience.
Totally. But, okay, back to her policies. We left off talking about the migrant crisis.
Right.
Which was a huge moment for her.
Yeah.
But there's another issue that's really tied to her legacy, climate change.
Yes.
She was a big advocate for climate action, wasn't she?
Absolutely. And her scientific background definitely played a role there.
Right.
She understood the urgency of the problem.
Yeah.
And she pushed for these ambitious renewable energy goals, both in Germany and internationally.
Germany's Energy Wende program. Yeah, their transition to renewable energy. Yeah. That was a massive undertaking.
It was a huge project.
But the sources say it's had mixed results.
Yeah, it has.
What do you mean?
Well, on the one hand, Germany's made significant progress in expanding solar and wind power.
Okay.
They've invested a ton in renewable infrastructure, and they've set these really ambitious targets for reducing carbon emissions.
What?
But it hasn't been easy. Phasing out coal has been harder than they thought.
Right.
And there are concerns about the reliability of renewables, especially when demand is high.
So it's work in progress.
It is, yeah. But at least Merkel made climate change a priority.
Yeah.
Which is more than you can say for some world leaders.
For sure. She was also a vocal critic of Trump pulling out of the Paris Agreement.
She was.
And she always pushed for stronger global cooperation on climate action.
Yes, she did.
Now, things get a little complicated when we talk about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline.
Ah, yes.
This was a project that Merkel really pushed for, despite warnings from some people about increasing Europe's dependence on Russian gas.
Right. This is where the 2022 invasion of Ukraine really casts a shadow on things.
Yeah.
You see Merkel's policy of Wandel durch Handel change through trade.
Okay.
It was based on this idea that closer economic ties with Russia would lead to more political openness and stability.
So she was betting on economic interdependence to prevent conflict.
Exactly. And for a while, it seemed like it might work. But then the invasion happened.
Yeah.
And it shattered that illusion.
And suddenly Germany's reliance on Russian gas didn't look so good.
It looked like a major vulnerability.
Like she totally miscalculated Putin's ambitions.
It's hard to say for sure, but the invasion definitely led to a reassessment of her legacy.
Right. Especially her approach to Russia.
Exactly.
It's amazing how one event can completely change how we view the past.
It's true, and it reminds us that history is always being written.
Yeah.
New information, new perspectives can challenge our assumptions.
So as we come to the end of our deep dive, what's the final takeaway?
How should we remember Angela Merkel?
Yeah.
It's tempting to try and sum her up with a simple label, hero, villain, pragmatist, idealist, but I think she's too complex for that.
I agree.
She was a product of her time, shaped by the events she lived through and the challenges she faced.
A scientist who went into politics at a pivotal moment.
Yeah.
A woman who broke barriers.
Absolutely.
A leader who guided Germany through some really tough times.
She was praised for her steady leadership, criticized for her cautious approach.
Yeah.
And ultimately, she left a mark on the world that we'll be talking about for years to come.
So, dear listener, as we surface from this deep dive, we leave you with a final question.
Okay.
In light of what's happening in the world today, how will Angela Merkel's legacy be judged in the years ahead?
It's a question worth pondering.
It is. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.